I'm hesitant to share this story because it's really embarrassing. I feel bad even typing it out because it's quite cringe-worthy. Also, it's not directly related to the topic since it happened in a hospital, but I'll share it anyway. From what I gather, they did not have to restitch her again. W. Price. When we arrived, we met the nurse, who looked upset. I bought my fries and we sat down. My ex asked her friend what was wrong, and the nurse shared this story. The nurse told us about a woman who had undergone surgery to remove her appendix. After the surgery, the woman was sent home, but she returned a few days later, complaining that her stitches had come undone. The nurse mentioned to my ex and me that this wasn't uncommon, especially since the patient was overweight. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying my French fries, feeling grateful that my snacking abilities are still going strong. The doctor had sewn her back up, and once again, the patient departed. The next day, she came back. Her stitches had opened up again. Odd, but still not unexplainable. NF. Suggest to the patient that she avoid any unnecessary activity. They sew her up again, and she leaves. Current French fry consumption ability average warily chewing while waiting for multiple shoes to drop. Earlier that day, before we arrived, the woman had returned to the hospital again with the same issue. Her stitches had come undone. This was the fourth time it had happened, and the doctor was frustrated. He asked her, "What's going on? Are you pulling out the stitches on purpose?" The woman got defensive and started crying. The doctor sensed something was wrong and refused to let her leave until she told them the truth. That's when they called in Nurse Emily, a kind and compassionate young nurse who had a gift for getting patients to open up. She was the kind of nurse I would want caring for me, and I was sure she could get to the bottom of this mystery. Ready for this? N.F/22.M.T manages to get this patient to admit that it is not in fact her whom is pulling the stitches out, but her fiancé. This complete sociopath has convinced the patient to allow him to penetrate her sexually through the hole in her belly where the doctor had removed her appendix. Apparently, this was not a painful event for the patient, even though some fucking nut was railing her in the guts. They made her promise not to have the stitches removed again prior to sending her out. Current French fry consumption ability. The plane has crashed into the mountain. We're done here. From what I gather, they did not have to restitch her again. Story 2. I witnessed something strange and secretive happen in Monterey, California around 2005. It was a weekday, and I was at a busy transit plaza with benches and decorative columns. There were several bus stops on 3 sides of the open area. I remember it vaguely. What stood out was that there were only about 10 people around, and 5 of them caught my attention. They wore suits, sunglasses, and had short, neat haircuts. They looked very fit and stood out from the rest. The 5 men in suits and sunglasses didn't have identical outfits, but they shared a similar style. Then, a man walked into the plaza from the sidewalk. That's when I realized the suited men were somehow connected. One of them stepped forward, holding up both hands with palms facing the newcomer, as if signaling him to stop or calm down. The suited man who stepped forward said, "There's no need to make a scene, sir. Just stay calm." Meanwhile, the other 4 men in suits moved in, positioning themselves behind and on both sides of the newcomer, forming a semicircle around him. The suited man kept repeating variations of the same phrase, "Just stay calm, sir. We don't want to cause any trouble, do we? Let's not make a scene." The newcomer, some dude, looked completely baffled, with no idea what was happening. It only took them about 15 seconds to surround him and usher him into the back door of a car that had just pulled up a dark-colored Caprice, either black or blue. The whole ordeal was over in less than a minute, maybe even less than 45 seconds. Some dude seemed like an ordinary person, nothing out of the ordinary. Some dude was wearing a red rugby shirt and jeans. Even now, certain details of this incident remain vivid in my memory. I'm confident I could identify him from a lineup based on how he looked then, at least. As I quickly walked away, I made a conscious effort to etch the entire scene into my memory. For the next week, I was extremely paranoid, to the point where my friends thought I was acting strangely, like I was under the influence of something. But I knew what I saw, and it left a lasting impression on me. Story 2. Am I wrong to say something to my fiancée? She told me not to attend an old friend's funeral, and I responded by saying, I guess our wedding isn't as important to me as you thought it was. I'm looking back on that moment and questioning my choice of words. I'm a 29M engaged to a 31F, and our wedding was supposed to happen on July 15th. But let me give you some background information. When I was 16, I started dating my first girlfriend, Sandra. We were together for about 3 years, and since we were in high school, our families met pretty early on in our relationship. Sandra had a younger brother named Kyle, who was 10 years old at the time. I never expected to become so close to him, but he really looked up to me, and I became like a big brother to him. We spent countless hours playing video games together, and he would often ask for my help with his homework. I grew really fond of him, and our bond was special. But, as with all things, our close relationship didn't last. Sandra and I eventually broke up, and we drifted apart from each other's families. I even moved away from that town altogether, making it impossible for us to see each other again. Fast forward to just a few days ago, when I received a devastating message from Sandra. She told me that Kyle, my former little buddy, had passed away in a tragic car accident caused by a drunk driver. It was heartbreaking news that hit me hard. I was completely shattered by the news. Even though it had been about 10 years since we last saw each other, my memories of Kyle remain frozen in time, and I still think of him as the same young boy I once knew. Sandra reached out and asked me to fly out for the funeral, saying that Kyle would have wanted me to be there. Without hesitation, I agreed to attend. But before booking my ticket, I wanted to make sure to tell my fiancée about it. I approached her and explained the situation, the funeral, who it was for, and that Sandra had invited me. But to my surprise, she flat out told me I couldn't go. I asked my fiancée why I couldn't go to the funeral, and she revealed her concerns. She didn't want me to attend because my ex-girlfriend Sandra would be there, and she suspected that Sandra might try to rekindle something with me. I tried to reassure her that Sandra would be too grief-stricken over her brother's passing to even consider such a thing. But my fiancée remained skeptical, saying she had no way of knowing Sandra's true intentions since they'd never met. I suggested a solution. I could ask Sandra to invite my fiancée to the funeral as well, and we could attend together. But to my surprise, my fiancée dismissed the idea, calling it creepy to attend the funeral of someone she didn't know. I stood firm, telling her that I was going to the funeral, with or without her. She tried to guilt-trip me, saying that my decision to attend the funeral was putting our wedding in jeopardy. But I was unmoved. In a moment of frustration, I blurted out that our wedding apparently wasn't as important to me as she thought it was. With that, I stormed off, feeling angry and hurt. Later that evening, I booked my plane ticket and left, determined to pay my respects to Kyle, no matter what. The funeral has just ended, and I've said my goodbyes. Sandra and I only had a brief conversation, about 5 minutes, before we went our separate ways. I'll be heading back home tomorrow, and I'm prepared for the possibility that my fiancé may have ended our engagement. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know I had to be here for Kyle and Sandra, even if it meant potentially losing the person I was supposed to spend the rest of my life with. So was I wrong to prioritize my loyalty to my old friend over my commitment to my fiancé?